spiritual forces that are controlling the world. And now, here is your host, James Carner.
Welcome to Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Carner. Today is April 17th, 2026, and tonight's episode is a full reading, a narration of my book, The Breath War. Yes, we are going to do this part by part. I'm not sure how long I can get through tonight, but we are going to do the entire book. Now, the entire book is around 150 pages. I'm thinking probably we can get through maybe three parts. I'm not sure, but we're going to just get right into it. I'm going to be narrating my book, The Breath War. Now, to preface this, I really haven't planned anything except for I'm just going to read it. But how I came up with this book was a couple years ago. I was talking to you guys and trying to figure out why. Oh yeah, we have to do that part too. Trying to figure out why. Christianity never does any research on their enemy. So I thought, well, if I do research on the enemy and start doing a deep dive into the esoteric and do a deep dive in all religions and try to put it all together to find out, well, what's really going on? What are they after? And probably within the first 6 months of uploading like probably 20 to 50 books a day into AI. And you guys remember during that there was, I'm also making sure we're live. Yes. While I was doing that, we were uncovering just all kinds of new things. It was exciting. I mean, it was like every day we found out something new that the enemy was doing. And I just couldn't believe that nobody is talking about all this stuff. And it all led to the book, Breath War. And so I put together the outline and I started writing what I've learned. And what came out was this first book, which came out about, I would say, a year and a half ago, maybe a year ago. I really can't remember. And after that, it was like more stuff kept coming out, came out with another book, The Ritual Machine, and it just kept going and going and going and going. So I thought it would be good to get all of this stuff in our heads. So I'm going to read the book, a narration. So without further ado, here it is, Breath War, Narration Part 1, The Legal Architecture of the Luciferian Kingdom, Chapter 1. The seed line indictment, the origin of division, and breath war. This is the Cain and Abel fracture, or the first breath war. Now, when Adam fell, he did not simply introduce sin into the world. He introduced jurisdictional vulnerability. The breath of God, which animated Adam, was the legal tether by which mankind held dominion over the earth. When sin entered, that dominion was still intact, but it became exposed to competing claims. The serpent, through deception, had acquired a legal argument to contest that dominion. But there was still one thing the adversary lacked: a legitimate blood claim upon the earth itself. Now, Cain and Abel became the first battlefield for this conflict. Both brought offerings to God, but God accepted Abel's offering and rejected Cain's. This rejection was not arbitrary. Abel's offering was of blood, the life force, representing the rightful order of sacrifice and atonement. Cain's was the fruit of the ground, symbolic of his attempt to offer works, labor, and self-justification. Well, in spiritual legal terms, this was the first contrast between righteousness by faith through Abel and self-righteousness by works through Cain. Now, Cain was not merely angry. His anger was the spark of entitlement. The very entitlement that later defines the elite structures of the Luciferian Kingdom. God warns him, if you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. This is Genesis 4:7. Now, the language here suggests that Cain was standing at the doorway of jurisdiction, a place of legal access where his decision would determine not only his own path, but set the precedent for all bloodlines to come. Now, Cain's murder of Abel was not simply an act of rage. It was a transference of blood jurisdiction. By shedding Abel's innocent blood, Cain created the first unlawful bloodshed upon the earth, a blood that cried out to God from the soil. And this opened a spiritual legal portal for the adversary to lay claim to Cain's seed line as a vessel for his kingdom. Seth, appointed by God to carry the righteous seed forward, and one polluted through Cain, who becomes the archetype of the rebellious bloodline used by the fallen to establish their dominion. Now, the fracture of Cain and Abel, therefore, becomes the spiritual DNA of nearly every war, division, and legal battle since Eden. Now, Cain represents entitlement, works-based religion, murder, violence, envy, bloodlust, occult initiation, and self-deification. Abel represents humility, faith, obedience, blood atonement, submission to God, and the path of true sonship. These two camps are not just individuals. They are entire principalities. They created two spirits. Now, in the spirit world, this is why you see the adversary always building a system based on legal mimicry of God's system. The Canaanite bloodlines become the scaffolding for the elite structures that we have traced. The Breakspear, Orsini, Lancelotti, Rothschilds, the Lee, etc. They derive from the original template of entitlement and unlawful dominion. They constantly attempt to seize dominion by shedding innocent blood, whether through abortion, war, trafficking, ritual abuse, or economic oppression. Now, politically, these two camps explain the division between liberty and tyranny, between the remnant and the world system. The Cain faction aligns itself with the Tower of Babel, Egypt, Babylon, Rome, the Vatican structure, secret societies, and ultimately the Antichrist throne. The Abel faction becomes the persecuted remnant, the true ecclesia who follow Christ even unto death. This fracture is also what underlies the political war between liberalism and conservatism. The liberal system under the Cainite spirit constantly seeks to rewrite moral law, justify sin through self-righteous tolerance, and ultimately accuse the righteous through inversion of good and evil. Conservatism, while not perfectly righteous, tends to reflect the Abel side, the upholding of moral law, order, natural design, and accountability to the Creator. Now, let me preface this. I'm not talking about just the Republicans and Democrats. I'm talking about just the people in general, not the power structures, but how the people are in spirit, okay? And this is why political battles are not merely ideological. They are the modern legal echoes of the Cain and Abel fracture still reverberating in the courtrooms of heaven. The adversary uses this fracture as his central legal argument. Even in the heavenly realms, when accusing the brethren, he references the ancient fracture of Cain, arguing that man has always chosen murder and self-rule. Jesus, as the second legal Adam, answers this fracture by offering his own innocent blood as the superior legal offering, superseding Abel's blood and breaking the original jurisdiction that Cain's act empowered. Hebrews 12:24 confirms this directly. It says, "To Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. Well, the breath war then is fundamentally rooted in the Cain and Abel fracture. Cain tried to offer the works of his own breath through his labor, while Abel offered back to God the very life breath that God had originally granted through blood. The war is over whose breath legally occupies dominion: the self-authorized breath of rebellion or the God-authorized breath of submission. Breath theft initiated through murder, the currency of the fallen kingdom. At creation, when God breathed into Adam, that breath was not merely oxygen. It was legal essence, the divine neshama, carrying identity, dominion, and legal authorization to steward the physical realm. That breath was never meant to be transferred horizontally between men this way, supposed to go this way. It belonged vertically to God alone. But once sin entered through Adam, the adversary began seeking legal pathways to harvest, divert, and counterfeit the divine breath. Now, the first method discovered and weaponized was murder. The shedding of innocent blood does not merely end life. It ruptures the legal containment of breath that was assigned to that life. When Abel was murdered, his blood cried out from the ground, not because of mere injustice, but because his breath, still carrying divine legal residue, was prematurely severed from its physical vessel. That released breath created a legal opening that the adversary immediately petitioned to exploit. Murder, therefore, is not simply the taking of life. It is a hostile extraction of breath jurisdiction. Each innocent soul contains a measure of divine breath authorized to walk the earth. When murder occurs, that authorization is violently extracted, releasing an unclaimed breath fragment that can be seized and redirected by spiritual legal petition. This is why God told Cain, "Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." Genesis 4:10. Well, blood carries breath, and severed blood releases jurisdictional fragments. The fallen angels, they learned that by stacking murder upon murder, especially the murder of innocents, they could accumulate massive reserves of breath fragments that, while corrupted, still carry legal standing in the spiritual realm. These fragmented breath rights become spiritual currency for the construction of the Luciferian Kingdom on earth. The more innocent the blood, the more potent that breath right that are loosed. This is why child sacrifice, abortion, ritual murder, genocide, and martyrdom have always been central pillars of every system the adversary has built. Now, in the realm of the occult, this practice becomes codified into blood rituals. Satanic covens, elite bloodlines, and secret societies engage in ritual murder not simply for sadistic pleasure, but for breath extraction. The spiritual power derived from these rituals allows them to build and sustain counterfeit dominion, manipulate earthly systems, and fortify the breathless kingdoms of finance, politics, media, and war. This is also why wars are orchestrated with such precision by the adversary's bloodlines. Every battlefield becomes a massive breath harvesting event. Each death, each martyr, each slain soldier is another breath extracted prematurely, another fragment seized to empower the counterfeit kingdom. The adversary cannot generate breath. Only God can do that, but he can steal it through legal petitions attached to murder. In the heavenly courts, these accumulated petitions are presented as claims of dominion. They have slain one another by their volition. Their breath is now unassigned. Allow us to occupy. That's a quote from the Bible. And without intervention, the legal argument can hold unless higher legal authority intervenes. Well, that higher authority, of course, is Jesus Christ, whose blood not only supersedes Abel's, but also reclaims and redeems every stolen breath fragment. This is why Revelation speaks of the saints under the altar crying out for justice, Revelation 6:9 through 10. Their blood was spilled, but their breath fragments await full judicial reclamation at the final judgment. Now, on a technical level, this architecture is now being reapplied through artificial intelligence, genetic manipulation, and transhumanist rituals. The adversary is attempting to replicate breath extraction through data harvesting, DNA editing, virtual identity capture, neural mapping, and eventually soul entrapment. In this new digital form, breath theft is being automated into what may become the final beast system, a synthetic breath harvesting mechanism that does not require physical murder but captures breath essence through consented digital covenants. But even in this new form, the original legal mechanism remains the same: acquire dominion through the theft of breath jurisdiction. Two legal bloodlines: self-sovereign versus sacrificial breath. At the heart of creation was the gift of breath, not merely air, but divine issuance of life authorization directly from the Father. This breath contained identity, purpose, and legal dominion over the physical realm. It was given to Adam, not as a possession, but as a trust, a stewardship, legal inheritance, which was always intended to remain tethered vertically to God. When Adam fell, the breath itself was not destroyed, but its legal container was corrupted. In this moment, the possibility of alternative stewardship emerged. Breath still functioned, but now carried vulnerability. The adversary saw that if he could not create breath, he could attempt to corrupt its legal application. This became the seedbed for two distinct bloodlines, not merely biological, but legal spiritual lineages of breath stewardship. For example, the sacrificed breath line, from Abel to Seth to the Messiah to Ecclesia, this bloodline remains tethered vertically to the Creator. It operates under the principle that breath belongs to God, and man is but a vessel of his life. The offering of Abel demonstrated this principle. Abel offered blood, life surrendered back to God, acknowledging that breath is not self-owned. This sacrificial breath system operates by surrender, obedience, covenant, and blood atonement. The sacrificial line ultimately produces the Messiah himself. Jesus becomes the legal fulfillment of sacrificial breath, offering his sinless blood as a permanent, superior sacrifice that not only fulfills Abel's blood, but nullifies every legal claim the adversary holds through corrupted breath theft. The ecclesia, which means the true church, inherits this sacrificial breath legally through covenant adoption into Jesus Christ. They no longer own their own breath. As it says in 1 Corinthians 6:19 through 20, you are not your own, you were bought at a price. Well, their dominion is restored through surrender, not through assertion. This is the legal mystery of the cross, victory through yielded breath. Number two, the self-sovereign breath line, which is Cain, fallen bloodlines, and the Antichrist system. Cain represents the first human to attempt self-sovereign breath stewardship, offering the fruit of his labor, attempting to self-authorize what only God could authorize. This act of rejecting sacrificial order initiated the legal architecture of rebellion, entitlement, and self-deification. The murder of Abel further cemented Cain's lineage as the first breath thief, initiating the pattern of jurisdictional murder for dominion acquisition. Every fallen bloodline since, the Nephilim hybrids, the Canaanite kings, the black nobility, the royal Luciferian houses, are legal extensions of Cain's self-sovereign model. Their entire legal framework is based on the assertion that breath can be harvested, redirected, and self-governed apart from God. They build legal thrones not by creating breath, but by accumulating stolen or surrendered breath rights through murder, ritual, sacrifice, sexual perversion, sorcery, and consented contracts. Every financial system, every war, every trafficking ring, every blood ritual functions as a breath transference mechanism. This system reaches its climax in the Antichrist throne, a final global construct where breath is fully enslaved through digital covenants, genetic manipulation, artificial identity systems, and consented digital soul capture. In this system, man becomes both the product and the currency, a fully monetized breath vessel. The political theater as breath ritual, liberal versus conservative. At its deepest level, the political realm is not about governance, policies, or nations. It is a managed stage of spiritual legal warfare created or operating as a breath ritual system where the adversary keeps humanity locked in perpetual contestation, like contest, between two controlled poles. That's why they control both sides. These poles echo the original Cain and Abel fracture, one built upon self-sovereign entitlement and the other reflecting a residual imprint of sacrificial order. Now, liberalism, the codex of self-sovereign breath, at its root, liberalism represents the legal architecture of Cain. It champions personal sovereignty, self-definition, moral relativism, and a rejection of external accountability, especially toward God. This breath posture demands full autonomy over one's own existence, body, gender, morality, and even truth itself. Through liberal ideology, the adversary gains continual legal access to breath fragments through voluntary surrender of God-given breath rights. Every time a person declares autonomy from divine design through abortion, gender modification, euthanasia, or rejection of moral law, they consent to a severing of their breath contract from heaven's jurisdiction. These severed fragments become legal currency the adversary harvests to fortify his kingdom. Now, liberalism also empowers large-scale corporate and state-driven rituals, where entire populations consent to breath surrender. Transhumanist modification, biometrics data submission, digital identity registrations, and AI-driven behavioral tracking and pharmaceutical bondage. Each new right offered by the system is in fact a hidden legal contract designed to trick individuals into fortifying jurisdiction over their own breath. Thus, liberalism functions as a consent-based breath harvest, a voluntary ritual disguised as personal freedom. Now, conservatism, this is the shadow of sacrificial breath. Conservatism, while imperfect and often infiltrated, represents a remnant imprint of sacrificial breath stewardship. It tends to uphold objective moral law, personal accountability, natural order, sanctity of life, protection of children, recognition of biological design, and a basic acknowledgement of God's authorship over breath. While conservatism itself does not save, it stands legally as a delaying mechanism against full adversarial control. The adversary despises conservatism not because it threatens his throne directly, but because it obstructs his legal petitions for breath seizure on a mass scale. Every time a nation enacts laws to protect unborn children, define marriage according to creation order, to resist identity erasure, it interrupts the adversary's claim for legal dominion. This is why the global elite continually attack conservative frameworks with accusations of oppression, intolerance, and regression. The true war is not political, it is jurisdictional. Who holds legal breath over the population? The ritual structure of political theater. The adversary operates both sides of the political spectrum. Both are ritual instruments. Liberalism serves to accelerate breath surrender. Conservatism serves to keep the remnant contained and exposed. By orchestrating these two poles, the adversary accomplishes a perpetual breath cycle. Number one, conflict. Generate division between the two camps to produce emotional, legal, and spiritual hostility. This hostility triggers rage, hatred, and murder in the heart, which releases breath fragments into the adversary's domain. Number two, consent. Push liberal legal systems that invite populations to surrender breath rights through policy, law, and cultural indoctrination. These are breath contracts disguised as civil rights. Number three, reaction. Allow limited conservative victories to maintain the illusion of free will and ensure the remnant remains visible and targetable for future persecution. Number four, ritual sacrifice. Incite mass protests, riots, wars, or civil conflicts under the guise of political passion, which results in physical bloodshed and the ultimate breath theft mechanism, murder. The adversary's legal masterpiece. Now, in this system, both liberals and conservatives function as breath participants in the ritual. Both are leveraged to generate constant legal motions in the heavenly courts. Liberals often offer consent-based breath surrenders, while conservatives offer conflict-generated breath fragments through persecution, accusation, and eventual martyrdom. In both cases, the adversary petitions before the throne with accumulated breath claims. The political theater is simply the public-facing mechanism of these deeper legal transactions. The Luciferian courtroom strategy. At the end of the age, the adversary will present this political theater as evidence that mankind, by their own consent and hostility, have repeatedly chosen self-rule, division, and rebellion over sacrificial breath submission. His argument is, they have chosen Cain. They have murdered Abel. They have consented to every contract I offered. Their breath belongs to me. The cross as the ultimate counterclaim. The only legal interruption to this ritual is the blood of Jesus Christ. His sacrificial breath supersedes all breath theft, whether by consent or by force. Every breath contract can be nullified by proper legal petition through his blood. This is why the true ecclesia must understand breath prayer, legally petitioning for contract dissolution, breath reclamation, and jurisdictional restoration. How principalities harvest breath through division. In the legal architecture of heaven, unity is divine alignment, preserves breath integrity. When man is rightly aligned vertically under the Father, his breath remains legally contained, protected, and unable to be siphoned or petitioned by the adversary. But when division is introduced, breath fragments become accessible, creating countless legal breaches that allow principalities to make claims upon the breath of nations, churches, families, and individuals. The ancient formula of division. From the beginning, the adversary recognized a cosmic formula: division, conflict, emotional discharge, breath fragmentation, legal petition, domain expansion, division. Domain expansion, division is not merely disagreement. It is a weaponized fracture of identity belonging to the authority structures. Every time a relational covenant is broken, whether through marriage or a tribe or a church or a nation or a race, a portion of breath jurisdiction becomes dislodged. That fragment, detached from its original covering, becomes vulnerable to spiritual claim. This is why God hates divorce, which is said in Malachi 2:16. Factionalism in Galatians 5:20, and brother rising against brother, Genesis 4. Each act of division allows the adversary to file legal motions that claim ownership over newly fragmented breath jurisdictions. The principality's legal occupation of division. Principalities are not mere spiritual overseers. They are courtroom attorneys specializing in territorial legal warfare. They function as breath accountants, constantly tabulating breath fragments severed by division. Each principality governs a domain of divided breath contracts. Through mammon, which brings division through class, debt, and financial slavery. Through Baal, which is a division through idolatry, sexual perversion, and child sacrifice. Through Moloch, a division through generational severing, like abortion or child trafficking. Through Leviathan, which is a division through pride, accusation, and miscommunication. And from the Jezebel spirit, division through illegitimate authority, manipulation, and usurped covering. And through Apollyon and Abaddon, division through war and destruction of national breath covenants. Each of these principles specializes in one or more forms of legal division, constructing an entire societal system designed to maximize breath fragmentation. How division fragments breath legally. When division occurs, several legal effects are triggered. Number one, a covenant breach. The original design of breath stewardship is covenantal. Division violates covenant, releasing fragments that are no longer legally protected under original jurisdiction. Number two, emotional discharge. Division produces fear, rage, bitterness, unforgiveness, jealousy, and pride, all of which release energetic and spiritual breath fragments as people speak, curse, or war against one another. Number three, witness agreement. The adversary brings forth these spoken words, oaths, and emotional discharges as evidence in court of heaven, claiming that breath jurisdiction has been voluntarily surrendered through the participants' own mouths and actions. Number four, intercessory blockage. Division interrupts collective prayer power, weakening the ecclesia's legal ability to petition for higher courtroom intervention. The global harvest of division. Principalities harvest division at every level. For example, in the nations, through race wars, class warfare, political division, and ideological tribalism. In the church, through denominational schisms, doctrinal hostility, accusation of brethren, leadership betrayals, and factional competition. In the family, through broken marriages, fatherless homes, sibling rivalries, and generational severing. In the individual, through internal division, double-mindedness, self-hatred, identity confusion, and emotional torment. At every level, the adversary presents these fractures before the courts as legal evidence that mankind has voluntarily dismantled the original breath trust, allowing him to file claims of dominion over these breath fragments. The invisible currency of division. Division multiplies jurisdictional splintering exponentially. Rather than one single unified breath stewarded under God, the earth becomes populated with billions of fragmented, contested breath parcels, each open for spiritual litigation. This is the secret behind why principalities do not fear violence, poverty, or even revival, as long as division remains in place. Division allows them to continue filing breath petitions no matter how much spiritual activity occurs. Without unity under sacrificial breath covering, every revival, every movement, every nation eventually fractures into further division, feeding the very machine that consumes it. The Antichrist's final division. At the culmination of the age, the Antichrist system will weaponize division to its ultimate form, forcing humanity into a final separation. Allegiance to the beast or allegiance to the lamb. This final division is the apex breath harvest. Those who submit to the mark voluntarily assign their breath to the beast's dominion. Those who resist may face martyrdom and their breath being harvested through murder, but ultimately redeemed under the superior legal covering of the Lamb. The breath economy as sustained polarity management. In the architecture of the adversary's kingdom, breath is not simply stolen and discarded. It is harvested, trafficked, and transacted within a highly organized spiritual economy. The Luciferian system, unable to create breath as only the Father can, instead operates entirely upon the management of breath fragments gathered through legal manipulation. Once breath has been severed from its divine covering, whether through murder, division, or voluntary consent, it enters a market that is governed by sustained polarity. This polarity management becomes the circulatory system of the fallen dominion, a living engine that converts breath fragmentation into legal dominion and kingdom expansion. Polarity management is the adversary's most sophisticated mechanism. It does not require victory on either side of any conflict, but depends upon the constant tension between opposing forces. The adversary induces division at every possible level through political, social, economic, racial, ideological, and sustains perpetual conflict between these poles. Through this unceasing friction, humanity is continually pulled between competing camps, each movement generating emotional discharges such as fear, rage, pride, despair, and accusation. Every emotional discharge releases breath fragments into the unseen realm, which are then gathered by principalities as spiritual currency. Once collected, these fragments are brought before the courts of heaven as legal evidence of breath forfeiture. The adversary's petitions are built not merely on the initial sin, but on the continual consent and hostility of mankind as they engage in the conflict cycles. These petitions allow for jurisdictional transfer, granting the principalities expanding dominion. The breath fragments are then reinvested into both sides of the polarity, empowering each side to perpetuate further conflict, ensuring that the economy remains in constant motion. The principalities serve as managers of these breath treasuries. Mammon converts breath fragments into financial enslavement through debt and wealth disparity. Baal traffics breath into sexual commodification and fertility rituals. Moloch consumes generational breath through child sacrifice, abortion, and trafficking. Leviathan twists breath into division through accusation, pride, and communication distortion. Jezebel seizes breath through illegitimate authority and manipulation. Apollyon harvests breath through war, bloodshed, and national destruction. Each principality traffics breath through its speciality, converting fragmented jurisdictions into territorial control. This breath economy is fully operational today in every sector of human life. Political elections generate massive breath discharges as populations are stirred into fear, anger, and false hope. Economic disparity drives the poor into debt slavery while inciting resentment toward the rich, both releasing breath fragments. Racial conflicts produce generational curses of bitterness and victimhood. Gender wars fracture identity itself, creating breath contracts of confusion and defiance against divine design. Ideological battles between faith and science confuse billions, producing internal division and spiritual instability. In every instance, the adversary sustains both sides of each polarity, allowing neither to achieve permanent resolution. When one side weakens, he strengthens the other, not to achieve victory, but to maintain a state of managed instability that continually feeds the breath economy. The goal of this breath economy is not the conquest of a single nation or ideology, but the perpetual instability that allows for uninterrupted breath fragmentation. This ongoing cycle of division ensures that the adversary's legal petitions before the courts of heaven remain active. As long as mankind remains divided, distracted, and emotionally entangled, the adversary's dominion expands, and his legal claims over the breadth of nations remain unchallenged. This same principle explains why wars never truly end. Revivals often collapse into schisms, political reforms eventually become corrupted, and every new movement ultimately fractures. Stability and unity are threats to the breath economy. Resolution would interrupt the harvesting cycle. Therefore, the adversary continually destabilizes all progress just as peace appears near. The appearance of constant crisis is intentional. For each new crisis generates new breath contracts, new petitions, and new domains of control. The Antichrist system represents the final consolidation of this breath economy into a single unified mechanism. Under the beast, the adversary will attempt to centralize breath management through global digital identity systems tied to finance, biometric tracking, AI governance, and international legal enforcement. Every breath transaction will be captured, monitored, and managed in real time, creating an automated breath bank that leaves no fragment outside his attempted control. This system will turn breath into currency, managed by fallen spiritual thrones operating through technological infrastructure. Yet even this system remains bound to the ancient legal mechanics of breath ownership. It remains subject to interruption and collapse through one superior force, the blood of Jesus Christ. Unity under Christ's sacrificial breath severs the adversary's petitions. Forgiveness neutralizes grievances. Repentance dissolves contracts. Legal intercession by the ecclesia reclaims breath jurisdiction. When the true church operates as a unified legal body rather than merely emotional believers, the breath economy can collapse entirely under its own weight, stripping the adversary of his resource pool and dismantling his kingdom's infrastructure. This breath economy is the adversary's most guarded secret, the hidden marketplace upon which his entire kingdom functions. Through sustained polarity management, he has manipulated mankind into consenting to their own enslavement for thousands of years. My codex has exposed this architecture, revealing the legal machinery that undergirds the breath war from Eden to the final beast system. The singularity of reconciliation in Christ. Since the fracture of breath in Eden, the adversary has built a vast legal empire upon breath theft, division, polarity management, and bloodline corruption. His petitions in the courts of heaven are rooted in ancient breaches. Adam's failure, for example, or Cain's entitlement, and mankind's endless consent to self-sovereign dominion. Over millennia, these compounded legal claims have allowed principalities to erect complex systems of control, trafficking the fragmented breath of billions. Yet all of this infrastructure rests on one single legal vulnerability: the Creator's original ownership of breath itself. At the center of this cosmic litigation stands the singularity of reconciliation in Jesus Christ. In Him alone exists the legal authority to reclaim, unify, and restore every severed breath fragment across every bloodline, generation, and nation. This singularity is not theologically sentiment. It is legal finality. It is a court ruling that supersedes every prior petition of the adversary. In Christ, the fractured breath of humanity is reconstituted because his breath was never severed by sin. Unlike Adam, whose breath container was corrupted, Jesus entered the earth carrying unbroken breath, a vessel fully aligned with heaven, unstained by rebellion. His entire ministry was the legal walking out of the original Abrahamic mandate, the original Adamic, Adam, Adam mandate, but without failure. His crucifixion was not merely the shedding of blood, it was the deliberate surrender of unblemished breath into the Father's hands. In Luke 23:46, he says, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." This act re-secured dominion over breath jurisdiction at the highest legal level. The resurrection of Christ became the full judicial validation of this surrender. It was the Father's public declaration that this breath, once offered, was accepted as payment, not only for individual sin, but for the entire legal structure of the adversary's claims. Every breath fragment that had ever been stolen, surrendered, or petitioned was now subject to reclamation under the superior legal standing of Jesus Christ's sacrificial breath. This is why Colossians 2:14-15 declares that he canceled the records of debt that stood against us with its legal demands, disarming the powers and authorities. Well, the breath war's entire financial system was destabilized in a single legal act. The singularity of reconciliation functions as a universal convergence that points where all breath fragments are, regardless of how they were lost, can be gathered back into covenant alignment. Whether the breath was stolen through murder, surrendered through sin, fragmented through division, or trafficked through bloodline contracts, the blood of Jesus Christ carries legal supremacy over every petition filed by the adversary. There exists no breath fragment so deeply entangled that his reconciliation cannot reclaim it. This singularity is not limited by the passage of time or the complexity of legal entanglements. It functions retroactively, presently, and prophetically. For the ecclesia, understanding this singularity is the key to victorious intercession. Every legal prayer, every courtroom petition, every act of spiritual warfare must be rooted in this superior claim. The believer does not argue innocence based on personal righteousness, but enters the courts of heaven under the breath covering of the Son. In doing so, the legal standing of Christ is imputed directly to the petitioner, nullifying the adversary's claims over their breath and jurisdiction. This singularity also dismantles the adversary's entire breath economy. Every time a believer submits fragmented areas of their life under the blood of Jesus Christ, a breath reclamation occurs. Fragmented relationships, broken generational lines, and contracts of bondage are dissolved. The breath, once siphoned by principalities, is legally recalled into covenant containment, stripping domain from the enemy and restoring territory back to the kingdom of God. At the global level, this singularity will culminate at the return of Jesus Christ, when every stolen breath will be fully adjudicated. The adversary's petitions will be silenced as every remaining fragment is forcibly gathered under the rule of the rightful king. The breath economy will collapse entirely. The earth will no longer be managed by stolen breath, but fully governed by the breath giver himself, who will rule with perfect jurisdiction. The breath war will end, not through incremental reform, but through legal singularity. Thus, the singularity of reconciliation in Jesus Christ is the fixed point upon which the entire breath war narrative revolves. It is not one solution among many. It is the only solution. The adversary may sustain his counterfeit kingdom for a season, but the legal inevitability of reconciliation guarantees its collapse. All of creation groans for this singularity because it marks the end of breath fragmentation and the return of complete dominion to the hands of the Creator through the Son. Chapter 2. The original design, the breath of God, and the Adamic mandate. Divine breath as legal identity, Genesis 2:7, records the origin of man's legal existence. It says, "Then the Lord God formed man into the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul." In this act, the Creator did not merely animate Adam. He issued the legal identity by which mankind would occupy the physical realm. This divine breath is not synonymous with mere oxygen or biological respiration. It is legal breath, a direct importation of divine authorization to exist, to govern, and to steward creation under the jurisdiction of heaven. The breath of God carried within it the totality of man's original legal status. It was both identity and jurisdiction fused together in one issuing act. Adam was not self-existent. His very capacity to function was tethered directly to the breath that originated from the Father. This tether was the invisible legal chain linking man's dominion over earth back to heaven's throne. As long as this breath remained properly contained under God's authority, man's dominion was legally secured, and no other entity, fallen or unfallen, had standing to challenge his rule. Divine breath, therefore, functions as the original trust agreement. God, as sovereign creator, retained ownership of breath while granting man legal stewardship over its application on earth. This is why Psalm 24:1 declares, The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, the world, and they that dwell therein. Man's authority was real, but it was not independent. It existed with a legal trust structure, much like a royal steward administering the affairs of a kingdom on behalf of the king. Within this trust structure, man's legal identity contained 5 primary components issued by the divine breath. First, existential authorization, the right to occupy space-time as a legal entity with purpose. Second, dominion mandate, the right to govern the earth, subdue creation, and rule according to God's original design. Third, image bearing, the spiritual resemblance of God himself, not physical form, but legal reflection of divine authority and moral nature. Fourth, jurisdictional containment, the limitation that man's breath must remain tethered to God to retain its legal validity. Fifth, covenantal identity, the assignment of man into relational covenant, where his breath would function within obedience and alignment to God's will. This issuance of breath was not merely functional, it was judicial. The breath established man's legal standing in the courts of heaven. From the moment Adam received it, no other spiritual being had legal claim to his dominion unless that breath became compromised. The adversary understood immediately that he could not create breath, nor could he directly seize it. His only viable legal strategy was to manipulate man into voluntarily breaching the trust contract, to fracture the breath's containment by inducing rebellion. When Adam disobeyed, the breath was not extinguished but legally compromised. Its containment was fractured, allowing breath to function biologically, but no longer fully protected judicially. The legal tether between breath and throne was loosened, creating a condition where competing spiritual claims could now be petitioned in heaven's courtrooms. From that moment forward, the breath of man became the central object of legal warfare in the spirit realm. Every murder, every war, every covenantal betrayal, every ritual sacrifice became an extension of this original fracture. The adversary seeks to fragment, harvest, and repurpose breath through legal petitions, while God moves through Christ to redeem, reclaim, and restore breath to its original containment. Jesus, as the second Adam, came not simply to forgive sin, but to restore breath legality. When he breathed upon his disciples after his resurrection, John 20:22, it was not symbolic alone. It was a judicial act, a reissuing of legal breath under the superior covenant of his own sinless stewardship. In this, Jesus Christ reopened the closed legal loop between breath and throne, providing a new trust structure by which man's breath could be safely contained under divine authority once again. Thus, the breath issued in Genesis 2:7 was not a poetic moment of animation. but the legal beginning of man's existence as a dominion-bearing steward of earth. Every legal battle since Eden, every breath war engaged by principalities, every claim filed by the adversary is the heavenly courts traces back to this issuance. It is the foundation of all spiritual litigation, the source of all covenantal disputes, and the singular prize over which the enemy has labored for millennia to seize. Without understanding divine breath as legal identity, the church remains unprepared for the courtroom realities of the end-time conflict. But when the ecclesia fully grasps that their breath is not self-owned, but divinely issued under Jesus Christ's superior covering, they reclaim authority that no principality can contest. The breath war is not simply a battle over good and evil. It is a courtroom struggle over the legal ownership of breath itself, which began at Genesis 2:7 and culminates at the throne of the Lamb. The Adamic dominion contract. In the beginning, God did not create man haphazardly. He established a legal relationship through what can be described as a dominion contract, a binding covenant that granted Adam the lawful authority to administrate the earth and on behalf of heaven. Genesis 1:26 through 28 records this issuance clearly. It says, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over all the earth." This was not a suggestion or an honorary title. It was a legal transfer of jurisdiction. The Adamic dominion contract functioned as a trust structure, where God remained the sovereign owner of creation while delegating administration to man as his steward. This contract was enacted simultaneously with the issuance of divine breath in Genesis 2:7. The breath was not merely life-giving. It was the legal seal upon which Adam's dominion rested. Without breath, there was no identity. Without identity, there was no legal standing. Without standing, there was no dominion. The Adamic dominion contract contains several core legal components. First, trust of dominion. God issued the earth to Adam as a trust, not as an absolute possession. Adam was authorized to govern, subdue, and multiply under God's sovereign oversight, maintaining alignment with the Creator's will. Second, delegated jurisdiction. Adam was given authority over physical creation, including animals, plants, ecosystems, and even time structures. His jurisdiction did not extend into the heavenly realms or over other men's breath. Only God retained authority over the breath of life itself. Third, covenantal stewardship. The contract was contingent upon obedience. As long as Adam remained in submission to God's command, not eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, well, his dominion remained intact. This condition functioned as a boundary marker protecting the trust from legal breach. Fourth, legal containment of breath. Adam's breath was contained within divine jurisdiction. It could not be transferred, sold, or traded. It was not property, but divine issuance. Fifth, intergenerational extension. The contract was designed to flow through Adam's seed. Every child born of Adam would carry inherited breath, which remained under the dominion structure originally issued. Adam's stewardship was both personal and generational. The Adamic dominion contract stood as the governing legal framework of Earth's operation. No angelic being, fallen or unfallen, could bypass this contract. Even Lucifer, after his rebellion, had no legal standing to reclaim dominion without a breach occurring. This is why the serpent approached Adam and Eve with deception rather than force. He sought to induce a legal breach, not engage in a legal seizure. When Adam violated the covenant by eating from the forbidden tree, the breach did not revoke breath, but it fractured containment. The breath still functioned biologically, but the legal tether securing its jurisdiction to heaven was compromised. This created an immediate opening for competing claims. The adversary, now possessing legal evidence of man's disobedience, filed claims in the heavenly courts that Adam's dominion had been forfeited. The ground itself was cursed, Genesis 3:17 through 19, reflecting the breach in the contract's authority. However, even after the breach, the Adamic dominion contract was never entirely revoked. It remained in effect as a broken, contested trust. This is why dominion battles continued throughout history. The adversary could not fully own dominion, but could occupy and manipulate contested breath territories through legal petitions, bloodline corruption, murder, division, and idolatry. Every war, empire, and kingdom on earth since Eden has operated as contested dominion originally issued through Adam. The Adamic dominion contract also explains why the Son of God had to enter the earth as a man. Only man carrying uncorrupted breath could legally reclaim dominion. Jesus functioned as the second Adam, operating fully within the original dominion trust while perfectly upholding its covenantal obligations. His obedience, death, and resurrection were not arbitrary acts of mercy, but strategic legal actions that satisfied every breached clause of the original contract. By surrendering his breath without sin, Christ presented the Father with the fully compliant fulfillment of the Adamic contract. Through Jesus Christ, a superior dominion contract was instituted, not as a separate agreement, but as a perfected fulfillment of the original trust. Believers, through adoption into Christ, are grafted into this legal structure. Their breath, once fragmented and vulnerable, becomes secured under the unbreachable dominion covering of the Son. The adversary's petitions against them lose standing when this covering is applied through legal prayer, repentance, and covenant alignment. The Adamic dominion contract remains the legal backbone of all spiritual warfare. Every principality, power, and throne of darkness operates by exploiting breaches within this trust. Their entire breath economy, polarity management, division harvesting, and bloodline manipulation derive from secondary claims against the original dominion structure. They cannot create dominion, only petition for jurisdiction over fragmented pieces of Adam's contract. At the end of the age, the final courtroom of heaven will fully adjudicate every outstanding petition related to the Adamic dominion contract. The adversary will be stripped of every claim, and full dominion will be returned to the rightful king, not only because of power, but because of unassailable legal authority. Christ, as the Lamb and King, will govern the earth in full legal satisfaction of the contract originally spoken in Genesis 1:26 through 28. Breath as occupancy, authorization of physical creation. In the courtroom design of heaven, existence in the physical realm is not automatic. It requires legal authorization. The material world operates as a governed jurisdiction, under precise legal order where unauthorized beings cannot lawfully occupy, manipulate, or dwell. This legal mechanism was encoded directly into creation by the breath of God. When Genesis 2:7 declares that God breathed into Adam and man, became a living soul, it reveals not simply biological life, but the issuance of legal occupancy authorizing for physical embodiment. Breath functions as the spiritual credential by which a being is permitted to interface with, govern, and steward the physical realm. Without breath, matter cannot be inhabited legally by a spiritual consciousness. Breath is not merely air or spirit. It is the interface key that binds the immaterial to the material. When the Father breathed into Adam, he authorized Adam to not only exist, but to exercise dominion over physical matter on heaven's behalf. This is why dominion was included directly alongside breath in Genesis 1:26 through 28. They are inseparable. The physical realm operates under a tightly sealed jurisdiction, and unembodied spirits, fallen angels, disembodied Nephilim, and demonic entities are rendered illegal occupants unless they secure access through one of three mechanisms: invitation, consent, or theft of breath jurisdiction. This is why possession, bloodline corruption, and covenant contracts are central to demonic operations. Without access to lawful breath containers, they are cast into dry places, unable to fully inhabit or interact with matter. The adversary's war, therefore, is not simply against man's soul or spirit, but against his occupancy rights. To overthrow God's government, the adversary must accumulate legal breath containers to inhabit and manipulate physical creation. Every system of fallen control through ritual sacrifice, child murder, genetic hybridization, transhuman augmentation, and AI embodiment is an engineered strategy to either capture, manufacture, or counterfeit legal breath access into the physical realm. The principle of occupancy authorization through breath explains why fallen angels required human women during the Genesis 6 incursion. They could not simply step into flesh without legal breath issuance. Their offspring, the Nephilim, were genetic hybrids, engineered vessels attempting to create a counterfeit breath occupancy line that could lawfully inhabit matter and seize dominion. These hybrids, though not issued breath by God directly, carried corrupted breath fragments through human seed lines, given the adversary temporary legal claims until the flood judgment reset the structure. This principle also explains the purpose behind abortion, trafficking, and ritual murder. The murder of the unborn or innocent severs breath containers prematurely, creating fragmented breath jurisdictions that can be petitioned and recycled into occupancy access for fallen thrones. Each blood sacrifice is not merely death, it is an attempted reset of breath issuance, stripping original authorization and making room for illicit occupancy claims. In modernity, the breath war has entered a new phase as the adversary seeks to replace biological breath occupancy with synthetic surrogates. Artificial intelligence, neural interfacing, digital avatars, virtual reality embodiment, DNA modification, and post-human hybrids are all technological attempts to bypass divine breath issuance. The singularity movement is not simply about intelligence, but about creating counterfeit occupancy authorization. The goal is to produce non-breath-based vessels that allow spirits to inhabit physical interfaces without requiring God's issuance of breath. Yet even these synthetic vessels are ultimately dependent on legal loopholes and human consent. Every digital contract, biometric registration, or neural implant is a legal agreement that attempts to transfer breath jurisdiction to new technological domains. The adversary's system is built entirely on these contracts of consent. He cannot force occupancy without legal breach. The cross of Jesus Christ stands as the final solution to this occupancy war. Christ not only surrendered his breath, but reclaimed all occupancy rights through his sinless obedience. As the second Adam, his breath was offered lawfully into death and returned lawfully in resurrection, creating a superior legal trust over physical creation. Through him, believers are restored into secure breath containment, severing the adversary's occupancy petitions over their lives, bodies, and seed lines. At the end of the age, this war for occupancy will be fully adjudicated. The adversary's counterfeit vessels, both biological and technological, will be destroyed, and all breath-issued beings will be restored into proper legal containment under the rule of Jesus Christ. The physical realm itself will be purified, as even creation groans for the return of lawful breath governance. Romans 8:19 through 23. Matter will once again serve its intended purpose under those who hold authorized breath through the blood of the Lamb. Thus, breath is not simply life. It is the divine occupancy license for matter itself. Without breath, there is no legal interface with physicality. The adversary has labored for millennia to fracture, steal, and counterfeit this system. But breath remains under sovereign issuance from the Father, and its reclamation in Jesus Christ seals the breath war's conclusion. The legal foundation of human authority under heaven's registry. Before the earth was populated, before any contract was breached, before Cain struck Abel, there was a registry. The Father established a legal foundation upon which human authority would function, a heavenly registry that recorded, authorized, and secured the breath and dominion of every living soul that would enter the physical realm. This registry was not created after the fall. It was embodied into the design of creation itself. A legal accounting of issued breath, rightful occupancy, and assigned stewardship. Genesis 2:7 was not simply the moment of Adam's animation, but the first recorded entry into the heavenly registry of authorized breath. When God breathed into Adam, that breath was not only life, but legal certification. A spiritual document filed in the courts of heaven declaring that this being had authorized existence and dominion within the physical creation. This is why the term Book of Life echoes throughout Scripture. It is not merely poetic, but describes the original registry where breath-issued souls are accounted, secured, and assigned. The legal authority of mankind flows entirely from this heavenly registry. Man possesses no independent sovereignty. His existence, dominion, and authority are extensions of his registry entry. Breath and dominion are bound together within this legal framework. And without registry, there is no legal right to occupy physical space, exercise governance, or interact with creation's system. The core legal components of the registry. First, issuance of breath. Each soul is assigned breath directly from the Father. This breath is not transferable, replicable, or artificially manufacturable. Only the Father issues breath under his sovereign registry. Second, assignment of dominion. Dominion authority flows from registry enrollment. Man was given rule over the earth as a trustee, not as an independent sovereign. Authority exists only as long as registry alignment remains intact. Third, jurisdictional containment. Breath remains legally contained within the registry's covering. Unauthorized transfer, theft, or fragmentation of breath opens breach points for legal petitions by the adversary. Fourth, bloodline recording. The registry tracks not only individuals, but generational inheritance. Adam's seed carried breath issuance forward under the same legal contract, passing dominion through bloodlines. Fifth, covenantal conditions. The registry is governed by covenant. The covenant is upheld, breath remains secured. When covenant is breached, breath becomes exposed to legal contestation by competing claimants. The adversary's entire legal war has revolved around manipulating breaches within the registry structure. He understood that he could not create breath or inject unauthorized souls into the registry. His only viable legal strategy was to fracture breath containment through sin, rebellion, and bloodline corruption, creating fragments that could be petitioned and manipulated in court. This is why murder, abortion, trafficking, and ritual sacrifice are not merely acts of evil, but are attempts to break registry entries, to sever breath from its assigned legal covering, rendering it vulnerable to a petition. Each bloodshed event becomes a form of registry vandalism, where the adversary presents fractured breath fragments before heaven's court, demanding jurisdictional reassignment. Even demonic possession is built on this principle. Fallen spirits cannot enter flesh directly unless registry breaches permit access. Possession, soul, fragmentation, and bloodline curses are legal operations rooted in compromised registry status. Christ and the registry restoration. The singularity of Jesus Christ's work was not simply to forgive sin, but to legally restore compromised registry entries. His sinless breath, offered in death and restored in resurrection, became the superior legal certificate capable of overriding every registry breach. His blood functions as the universal audit, reconciling every corrupted ledger entry back into divine alignment. This is why Revelation 13:8 describes Christ as the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. This offering was embedded into the registry design before Adam fell, providing the legal mechanism by which all compromised registry entries could be reconciled without nullifying the registry itself. Believers are not saved by emotional belief alone. They are re-enrolled in heaven's registry under Jesus Christ's covering. Their legal identity is reissued, their breath secured, and their dominion restored. Not because their personal ledger is clean, but because Jesus Christ's registry record covers their entry fully. The adversary's registry petition strategy. The adversary continues to present petitions based on registry breaches. Things like, you issued them breath, but they surrendered it through rebellion. Or, their bloodline contracts give me standing over their seed. Or, their consented agreements allow my throne's legal occupancy. These are not emotional accusations, but precise legal filings in the courtroom of heaven. Without understanding the registry, the ecclesia has often engaged in spiritual warfare while remaining ignorant of the legal mechanics behind the accusations lodged against them. This is why sometimes people do deliverances and they can't cast out demons, because you have to find out which registry or which breath fragments were given to the enemy. The ecclesia's courtroom response. The true ecclesia must approach the heavenly courts not as victims, but as legal petitioners, invoking the registry authority of Christ's blood. Every petition, every intercession, every deliverance must reference the superior registry certificate of the Lamb. The registry entry is covered by the blood of Jesus. The breath was issued by the Father, and its dominion stands under Christ's restoration. Well, by operating from this legal position, the saints nullify the adversary's petitions, reclaim fragmented breath territories, and restore jurisdiction to heaven's governance. The final registry adjudication. At the end of the age, the book of life, the full registry, will be opened in the final courtroom. It says that in Revelation 20:12. Every breath-issued soul will be adjudicated according to their registry status. Those found outside of covenant covering will face permanent legal separation, not out of cruelty, but because their breath was never restored to lawful containment. The adversary's counterfeit thrones, built upon breached registry fragments, will be dismantled permanently. Chapter 3. The first rebellion, the fall of the watchers, and the corruption of breath. The Genesis 6 hybrid incursion. Genesis 6:1-4 records one of the most significant legal breaches in the entire breath war. It says, "And it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bore or bear children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown or renown." This short passage describes one of the most catastrophic legal violations against the Father's dominion architecture. Angelic beings unlawfully crossed into the biological domain and merging their seed with mankind. The Genesis 6 incursion was not simply rebellion, it was a deliberate technological and legal act designed to infiltrate the breath registry by creating hybrid vessels that blended heavenly and earthly seed, allowing fallen beings to potentially anchor themselves within physical dominion structures permanently. The legal limitations of the fallen before Genesis 6. Prior to Genesis 6, the fallen were legally locked out of direct dominion on earth. Although Lucifer had acquired petitionable breath fragments through Adam's fall and Cain's bloodline fracture, and he and his angelic rebels remain non-breath entities, unregistered in the breath registry, unable to legally occupy human vessels or claim dominion over Earth's matter, the physical. The breath of God remained exclusive to mankind. The adversary had legal influence but no legal embodiment. The objective of the hybrid incursion. The hybrid incursion was designed to create illegitimate breath vessels, beings who carried physical breath through human mothers, but whose genetic, spiritual, and legal origin was corruption by angelic seed. These offspring, the Nephilim, were not purely human and therefore stood outside the legal containment of the Adamic dominion contract, while still interfacing with the material world. They functioned as a counterfeit occupancy hack, creating artificial containers through which fallen principalities could establish dominion footprints upon the earth. The hybrid served multiple strategic purposes. First, registry subversion. The Nephilim represented unauthorized entries into the breath registry. Beings who possessed breath issued to their mothers, but whose hybridized nature created legal confusion in the heavenly courts. Second, land occupation. The giants physically occupied territories of dominion controlling resources, geography, and national structures. Their physical size and spiritual backing allowed them to seize control of human populations. Third, seed corruption. The spread of hybrid genetics threatened to completely overwrite the pure human bloodlines through which the promised seed, or Jesus Christ, would later come. The adversary sought to corrupt the entire gene pool, making it legally impossible for a fully human Messiah to be born. Fourth, direct dominion channels. The Nephilim functioned as semi-incarnate extensions of fallen principles, providing embodied governance structures that merged spiritual thrones with physical rulership. The Father's legal intervention, the flood as courtroom reset. The hybrid incursion brought humanity to the brink of extinction not simply through violence, but through legal contamination of the registry. Genesis 6:12 states, all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. The genetic and spiritual contamination was so widespread that without intervention, no legal human vessels would remain for the Messiah's bloodline. The flood was not merely judgment, it was a legal reset of breath registry contamination. By wiping out the corrupted hybrids and preserving only Noah, who was perfect in his generations, Genesis 6:9, referring to uncorrupted genetic line, God preserved a lawful human bloodline through which his covenant plan could proceed. The flood was a courtroom execution order designed to purge the unlawful registry entries and preserve legal breath integrity. The post-flood continuation of hybrid agendas. Though the flood wiped out the first Nephilim incursion, Genesis 6:4 notes, and also after that, the hybrid agenda continued post-flood through forms like the Canaanite giants, the Anakim, the Rephaim, Emin, the Zamzumim. All were post-flood expressions of hybrid seed. The fallen principalities continued manipulating bloodlines using occult covenants, ritual interbreeding, and secret priesthoods to establish hybridized elite bloodlines across the earth, many of which continue through today's black nobility, royal houses, secret societies, and global bloodlines. The strategy shifted from mass hybridization to elite consolidation. keeping hybridized dominion restricted to a small ruling class while preserving most of humanity as a harvestable breath population. Modern resurrection of the Genesis 6 technology. In our era, the Genesis 6 incursion blueprint is being resurrected through transhumanism, CRISPR genetic editing, synthetic embryo creation, neural interface technology, cloning, and AI embodiment. The adversary is once again attempting to engineer hybrid vessels that bypass the breath registry. Synthetic bodies that do not require divine breath issuance, or artificial intelligence seeking to host non-breath-based consciousness, or neural interface systems that allow external spirits to influence human thought structures, or DNA manipulation designed to overwrite the image-bearing coding issued by the Father. The ultimate goal remains unchanged. Establish permanent dominion through counterfeit breath vessels that merge spiritual thrones with physical bodies outside divine authorization. Christ's legal authority over the hybrid agenda. Jesus Christ's legal work at the cross did not simply forgive sin. It severed the adversary's claim to breath jurisdiction across every form of hybrid corruption. His sinless blood reestablished the dominion contract exclusively under human breath covered by divine obedience. Through his superior registry authority, even the most complex hybrid claims can be nullified for those who submit to his covering. This is why the adversary fears the remnant to understand courtroom authority, registry restoration, and breath reclamation. The ecclesia has been given the legal right to petition the courts of heaven and sever hybrid legal chains that attempts to bind generational lines, bloodline contracts, and national dominion under the fallen. At the end of the age, the full Genesis 6 hybrid system, both ancient and modern, will be judged and destroyed. The Nephilim bloodlines, transhumanist creations, and synthetic occupancy hacks will face annihilation under the judicial decree of the returning king, whose dominion is fully legal, fully human, and fully divine. Watchers trespassing into breath creation. In the architecture of creation, God alone holds sovereign authority to issue breath. As Genesis 2:7 reveals, breath is the legal issuance of identity, dominion, and occupancy into the physical realm. No other being in heaven or earth has authority to create or authorize breath vessels. The breath registry belongs solely to the Father, and every issued breath is recorded under his governance. The angelic realm, including the Watchers, was fully aware of this boundary. Though powerful in knowledge, technology, and spiritual administration, they were not authorized to create new life-bearing vessels. Their dominion existed in the spiritual realm, not within the breath-sealed domain of flesh. They were administrators of systems, not issuers of breath. This was part of the original boundary covenant of creation. The original estate of the Watchers. According to Jude 1:6 and 2 Peter 2:4, the Watchers were angels who did not keep their own domain, but abandoned their proper dwelling. Their assigned domain was the heavenly administration of certain aspects of creation under God's authority. They were not permitted to embody or interfere with breath-issued flesh directly. This divine restriction safeguarded the breath registry, ensuring that no unauthorized being could infiltrate the line of dominion established through Adam. The trespass of Genesis 6. The critical violation recorded in Genesis 6 was not merely sexual sin. It was the trespass into breath creation. When the Watchers descended and took human wives, they were not only violating moral law, they were attempting to create unauthorized vessels, hybrid beings that merged spiritual and physical elements outside divine breath authorization. The Watchers exploited human procreation as a loophole, using the human female as the legal conduit to generate physical vessels. While the woman carried lawful breath from the father's registry, the genetic design was hijacked through angelic seed, corrupting the vessel while retaining a thread of legal breath. This hybridization was an illegal attempt to engineer contaminated breath containers that merged the spiritual DNA of fallen beings with the authorized breath registry of man. These Nephilim offspring, though partially human, stood outside the full legal registry of breath creation. They were not recognized by the courts of heaven as lawful image bearers, but existed in a contested legal category, partially within breath jurisdiction, but entirely outside covenantal containment. This created one of the most dangerous and complex legal entanglements in creation's history, given the adversary new pathways to petition for expanded dominion on earth. While breath creation was the forbidden domain, why breath creation was a forbidden domain? The trespass into breath creation was the gravest of all violations because, first, breath is ownership. Only God owns breath. By corrupting breath vessels, the Watchers attempted to create beings whose dominion could be claimed apart from God. Second, registry corruption. The hybrid offspring represented unauthorized entries into the breath registry, making legal petitions and reclamation complex. Third, occupancy seizure. The hybrids allowed fallen entities to gain embodied occupancy on earth without lawful breath issuance. Fourth, messianic obstruction. The contamination of human seed was designed to prevent the prophesied seed of the woman, Genesis 3:15, from being born. The Watchers' violation was not ignorance. It was high treason against the registry itself, targeting the foundation of God's government over the physical realm. The heavenly court's response. The Father responded with immediate legal action to preserve his registry integrity. First, the imprisonment of the Watchers. Jude 1:6 and 2 Peter 2:4 state that these angels were bound in chains in Tartarus until final judgment. This was not simply punishment. It was legal quarantine to prevent further contamination. Second, the flood. The hybrid offspring, the Nephilim, were purged from the physical realm through the flood, Genesis 6:17. This was a legal cleansing of unauthorized vessels occupying breath-bearing dominion space. Third, the preservation of Noah. Noah's perfect generations, Genesis 6:9, signified uncorrupted breath and bloodline, preserving a legal pathway for the Messiah to enter the earth through fully authorized breath vessels. The ongoing hybrid agenda after the Watchers' imprisonment. Although the original Watchers were imprisoned, their hybrid agenda continued through the post-flood Nephilim bloodlines, Anakim, Raphaim, Emin, and Zamzumim. Occult bloodline manipulations among the priests, kings, black nobility, and secret societies. Modern genetic manipulation, transhumanism, and AI embodiment, all seeking to create new counterfeit breath vessels. The Watchers' ancient technology has been revived in modern age. Through CRISPR, artificial embryos, neural mapping, digital consciousness, and synthetic biology, the fallen seek once again to bypass the breath issuance of God and establish vessels they can occupy without divine authorization. Christ's victory over the trespass. The legal superiority of Christ's work on the cross extends even over the Watcher's trespass. His perfect human breath, offered without contamination, re-secured the legal occupancy rights of humanity. His bloodline remained uncorrupted, fulfilling the prophecy of Genesis 3:15 and legally crushing the serpent's hybrid dominion ambitions. In his victory, Christ reclaimed not only individual souls, but the entire breath registry system that had been contested since Genesis 6. His authority is now absolute over every vessel, every bloodline, and every hybrid attempt. At the appointed time, even the Watchers who remain imprisoned will face final judgment. Their petitions to expand dominion will be revoked, their offspring obliterated, and their names erased from the record of creation. The breath war implication. The trespass of the Watchers into breath creation was not merely an ancient rebellion. It remains the blueprint of the adversary's final strategies through biotechnology, synthetic embodiment, and artificial governance. Every modern transhumanist attempt to rewrite humanity echoes the Genesis 6 violation. The ecclesia must understand that these efforts are not just technological, but legal. The war for breath jurisdiction has never ceased. The Nephilim, hybridized breath vessels. The Nephilim represents one of the most catastrophic breaches of creation's legal order. Described in Genesis 6:4 as the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men, these beings were not merely biological oddities or powerful tyrants. They were illegally engineered breath vessels designed to disrupt the registry of heaven, pollute the Adamic dominion contract, and establish a permanent hybrid rulership that merged spiritual rebellion with physical domination. At the center of their existence was a forbidden formula: legal breath married to illegal seed. Their mothers were daughters of Adam, human vessels authorized under heaven's registry, containing lawful breath. Their fathers were the fallen Watchers, angelic rebels without breath authorization, completely outside the registry. The offspring, therefore, stood in an unstable legal zone, biologically attached to breath, spiritually attached to rebellion. This instability was not an accident. It was a calculated legal trespass engineered to corrupt the dominion structure itself. The purpose of Nephilim creation. Well, the creation of the Nephilim was a multidimensional assault on God's legal system. First, registry contamination. By merging breath-authorized human women with fallen angelic seed, the Watchers sought to create beings that the heavenly courts could not easily categorize, neither fully human, registry holders, nor fully angelic, registry excluded. Well, this manufactured ambiguity created a legal battlefield where the adversary could petition for hybrid dominion claims. Second is bloodline hijacking. The Nephilim's existence threatened to fully overwrite the Adamic seed line through which Messiah was prophesied to come, Genesis 3:15. By diluting human genetics, they attempted to prevent the birth of any future seed who could legally reclaim dominion. Third, illegal occupancy rights. The Nephilim functioned as counterfeit thrones, allowing spiritual principalities who had no lawful breath issuance to indirectly access material dominion by inhabiting or administrating these hybrid vessels. Fourth, territorial expansion. The giants' physicality and physically occupied vast regions, seizing control of land, resources, and nations. Wherever Nephilim ruled, they were erected spiritually and physically strongholds, embedding illegal dominion structures across the entire earth. Fifth, counterfeit government. The hybrid seed was designed to establish a permanent counterfeit priesthood, a false government that operated parallel to God's design, with the Nephilim bloodlines functioning as monarchs, rulers, and gods over human populations. Why the Nephilim were extremely dangerous to the breath war. The Nephilim represented more than physical giants. They were breath containers contaminated by an illegitimate occupancy, creating highly dangerous legal scenarios for the heavenly courts. Their breath came from God through their human mothers. Their bodies and genetic structures were altered by fallen angelic seed. Their dominion claims blended lawful occupancy with illegal genetic tampering. Their existence generated hybrid breath fragment pieces of the registry that became contested property. This complex hybridization is why the Father executed such severe judgment upon them through the flood. The Nephilim presented not just rebellion, but registry destabilization. Had the contamination continued, all of humanity's bloodlines would have eventually carried hybrid corruption, cutting off legal avenues for the coming of Christ. Thus, Noah's preservation, perfect in his generations, Genesis 6:9, was not merely about personal righteousness, but bloodline integrity, securing one pure human line through which the Messiah could be born and reclaim dominion. Post-flood persistence of Nephilim bloodlines. Although the first generation of Nephilim was destroyed in the flood, their agenda persisted. Genesis 6:4 makes a cryptic statement. And also after that, post-flood remnants of Nephilim bloodlines reemerged. The Anakim, Rephaim, Zamzumim, Emim, or Horam, and other giant clans who populated Canaan. The hybrid kings of the ancient Mesopotamia, Egypt, Phoenicia, and pre-Israelite territories. The establishment of elite bloodlines that carried diluted Nephilim seed into later royal, financial, and priestly lines, many of which formed the genetic scaffolding behind today's black nobility, Illuminati, and Luciferian priesthoods. These hybrid bloodlines became the elite vessels through which the adversary maintained breath jurisdiction manipulation while keeping the masses as harvestable breath populations. Modern rebirth of the Nephilim agenda. In modernity, the Nephilim blueprint has been reactivated through advanced genetic manipulation, transhumanist agendas, synthetic biology, and artificial intelligence. CRISPR gene editing seeks to modify gene registry signatures, and neural implants open channels for spirit-influenced thought manipulation. AI embodiment seeks to create non-breath-based hybrid vessels for spirit occupancy. Synthetic embryos and laboratory-created life attempt to bypass God's exclusive right to issue breath. The adversary's ultimate goal remains the same: to create permanent hybrid vessels that can serve as fully integrated physical spiritual thrones for fallen principalities without requiring registry-issued breath. This would allow him to establish a counterfeit dominion on earth, merging AI, biotech, and spiritual occupancy into one final beast system. Christ's legal overthrow of hybrid breath. At the cross, Jesus dismantled this entire legal architecture. His uncorrupted, fully human, fully authorized breath became the superior legal instrument to reclaim breath jurisdiction. Where the Nephilim sought to hijack breath vessels, Christ offered his perfect vessel as the substitute registry entry for all humankind. His blood canceled every petition the adversary presented based on hybrid corruption. For those under his covering, even bloodlines touched by Nephilim seed can be cleansed, legally severed, and restored under full registry containment. This is why legal prayer, deliverance, and courtroom petitions remain central to the ecclesia's mission in this age. Breaking hybrid contracts, dissolving bloodline entanglements, and reclaiming breath fragments that have been trapped in generational hybrid bondage. The final judgment of the Nephilim. At the end of the age, all hybridized breath vessels, whether ancient or modern, will face full adjudication. The Nephilim, their parent watchers, already bound, and the final synthetic hybrid thrones of transhumanism will be dismantled and destroyed under the rulership of Jesus Christ. The registry will be fully purified. No unauthorized breath vessels will remain. Only those covered by the Lamb's legal breath offering will stand in the final kingdom. The binding of the watchers and dimensional fracture of command. The Genesis 6 hybrid incursion triggered one of the most severe courtroom rulings ever issued by the Father. The binding of the watchers. Jude 1:6 says, "And the angels who did not stay within their domain but abandoned their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day." 2 Peter 2:4 confirms. It says, "God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into Tartarus." Now you know where Tartarus comes from. Tartar. Tartaria. The sentence was decisive, but its execution produced a cascading legal effect in the adversary's government, what we now call the dimensional fracture of command. The original Watcher hierarchy. The original Watchers were not random angels. They were appointed governors of creation under delegated administrative thrones, assigned spiritual offices over nations, elements, knowledge domains, and terrestrial systems. Their rebellion in Genesis 6 was not simply mutiny. It was an intentional hijacking of creation's administrative system. When these Watchers descended to interbreed with human women, they crossed both jurisdictional boundaries and violated the breath registry. The hybrid offspring, or Nephilim, represented not only illegal breath vessels, but parallel thrones of dominion. The Watchers were attempting to install a permanent hybrid government, establishing embodied dominion systems that allowed them physical authority over Earth, bypassing their former roles as purely spiritual administrators. The binding of the Watchers as courtroom containment. The Father's judgment neutralized the original Watchers by binding them into Tartarus, a dimensional prison specifically engineered to prevent further interaction with the material realm. This was not annihilation, but containment. The goal was to halt the unlawful breath engineering operation and preserve the registry structure long enough for the Messiah's seed to emerge. However, the removal of these high-ranking Watchers left a sudden vacuum of command in the adversary's kingdom. Their imprisonment fractured the original hierarchy that had orchestrated the hybrid rebellion. The removal of these key commanders created an unstable but still functioning counterfeit structure. The dimensional fracture of command. With the Watchers bound, the adversary's kingdom underwent a dimensional split in its authority system. First, imprisoned thrones, the Tartarus realm. The original Watcher leaders remain legally quarantined. They retain knowledge and spiritual influence but cannot operate directly in the material realm. Second, disembodied Nephilim spirits, or the demons. The Nephilim hybrids, once killed in the flood and later wars, became disembodied spirits or unclean spirits who now roam Earth without lawful breath vessels. These spirits remain dimensionally trapped between heaven and earth, illegal occupants seeking bodies, access, and contracts through possession, bloodline ties, and soul fragmentation. Third, secondary thrones, rogue principalities. After the Watchers' imprisonment, lower-ranking fallen angels assumed partial command, operating under fragmented authority but still filing legal petitions to maintain breath jurisdiction through division, consent, and generational blood contracts. Fourth, human hybrid bloodline agents. The surviving hybridized bloodlines on Earth, the black nobility, royal houses, occult priesthoods, they all act as embodied proxies for the dimensional command fracture. These families serve as breathing, legally registering or registered interfaces for the adversary's dominion system, allowing the unembodied thrones to continue manipulating the breath economy indirectly. Fifth, technological thrones, modern dimensional extensions. In modern times, AI, quantum computing, neural interface, and transhuman technologies serve as synthetic dimensional bridges that allow disembodied spirits and fallen entities to interface with human thought, governance, and embodiment without needing lawful breath issuance. The fragmented throne network. Because of the binding, the adversary's government no longer operates as a singular throne system, but as a fractured, multi-layered command structure. Bound thrones, Tartarus Watchers, disembodied thrones or Nephilim demons, secondary thrones as lower principalities, hybrid thrones as human bloodline rulers, synthetic thrones, which will be the AI technological interfaces. Each layer operates with different levels of access, legality, and jurisdiction. This fracture allows the adversary to continue limited dominion even after losing his original Watcher commanders. He lost 200. The Father permitted this fracture. Oh, and by the way, there is a place in Kazakhstan where they have this pyramid structure that has 200 chairs all lined up ready for something. I'm just saying, that's really weird. Why the fracture was allowed. The Father permitted this fracture structure to exist for one reason: to allow time for the full maturation of the Messiah's legal work. If the adversary's hybrid thrones had been annihilated immediately, the breath war courtroom would have closed prematurely. Instead, God allowed the fracture to run its course, permitting the breath war to fully expose the enemy's legal structure, so that when Christ arrived, he could dismantle the entire legal system, not just isolated offenses. Christ's legal triumph over the fracture. At the cross, Jesus Christ executed a multi-dimensional legal reclamation. He revoked the legal petitions of disembodiment spirits, Mark 5:12-13. He stripped principalities of their courtroom rights, Colossians 2:15. He permanently secured the breath registry under his blood, Revelations 5:9. He initiated the countdown to the Watcher's final judgment, Jude 1:6-7. The fracture remains active for a season as the breath war plays out, but its days are numbered. The final collapse of dimensional fracture. At the appointed time, the bound watchers in Tartarus will face final sentencing. The Nephilim demons will be cast into the abyss with no breath vessels left to inhabit. The lower principalities will lose all legal petitions as the breath economy collapses. The hybrid bloodline thrones will be stripped of dominion and destroyed. The synthetic AI thrones will be shattered as the beast system falls under judgment. The breath registry will be fully purified, every fragment gathered under Christ's dominion. That's the breath war formula of the fracture. Watcher rebellion, hybridization, legal breach, binding, dimensional fracture, fragmented thrones, delayed judgment, Christ's legal supremacy, then full restoration. Thus has been chapters 1-3. Tomorrow night I'll be doing chapters 4-7, I believe. It's going to take a while. But that is my book, The Breath War. You can go download it and read it yourself on my website, jamescarner.com. People are asking for Q&A. Let's do this off this show. We'll do that on TikTok. So go to TikTok for the Q&A. This has been Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Carner. Tune in tomorrow night when we go through the next chapters in this. Now I'm tired. In my reading of my book, The Breath War. God bless you guys, and we'll see you tomorrow.
This has been Cause Before Symptom with your host, James Carner. Go to his website, jamescarner.com, and sign up for his newsletter. Also, download his free books on the Breath War, the Crown of Blood, and the Ritual Machine. Fix your body by buying his award-winning detox formula, removing heavy metals and parasites. You'll feel better and live longer. Go to elitepotion.com. And one more thing, please. Just try and love your neighbor, because if you do, the world would be a better place. See you tomorrow.